Coming up, the saga of how a teenage girl at a clothing store completely bewitched a journeyman lead singer who wrote a song just minutes after meeting her. She was so beautiful. This song would become the fastest selling debut single since the Beatles. It eventually outsold them with 10 million copies sold. Times were very good for this band at the time. They had the number one song in 1979, and this girl broke up with her boyfriend to be with this singer. But then just as quickly as their fortunes rose, they fell. By 1982, this band had vanished from the charts completely, and the girl broke up with the singer. Find out what happened to the band and the girl from a song that's really the Halley's Comet of rock and roll. It's a great story coming up next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you ever remember waiting in line around the block sometimes to see that great summer blockbuster back in the day, you're going to dig this channel. Potent nostalgia every day. Make sure to subscribe below right now and click the bell so you never miss an episode of our daily content. And for more content and behind the scenes footage and to help us keep it a daily channel, make sure to check out our Patreon link in the description below. And also we have our Vintage Years collection. I'm wearing 1981 right now. You can check those out by clicking the link up top. We're just celebrating the great years of music. It's time for another edition of our show, Bottle Lightning. We haven't done one of these in a little bit. You know, in the past, we've featured a lot of one-hit scorchers. I like to call them that instead of a one-hit wonder. But Bottle Lightning, this show is really about how a band created a universal song that rose like a comet, never to reach those lofty heights again. In 1979, the four members of the LA-based band, the Knack, bottled Lightning. Their first single, My Sharona. It's a song about lustful obsession that had one of the hottest rises to the top of the charts in music history. Only 13 days after its release, My Sharona struck gold. It was the fastest single by a debut act to sell over 500,000 copies for Capitol Records since I Wanna Hold Your Hand ignited Beatlemania in '63. Now, the single eventually moved to 10 million physical units in the US alone. The Knack's debut LP, Get the Knack, sold more than 1 million copies in less than 5 weeks and soared to number one on the Billboard 200 album chart, where it stayed there. That is until Led Zeppelin's In Through the Outdoor knocked it off its perch. The velocity of the Knack's global takeover was a blessing and a curse for the band. Just as quickly as their music rose to the top of the charts, the group faced a serious backlash, starting with claims that they were a band that was manufactured by the record label and that, you know, they hadn't paid their dues, even though that wasn't true. Although My Sharona was a Halley's Comet of the rock era, the Knack was no Milli Vanilli. The Knack was a band comprised of hardworking, dedicated musicians who cut their teeth many years before their phenomenal breakout success. I mean, singer Doug Fieger was an ambitious young artist in Detroit, Michigan, who fronted a cool local band named Sky. Everyone who saw Sky perform live thought that they had great potential, and the aspiring Feiger was determined to get the band national attention. So he swung for the fences. Feiger, who was just a high school senior at that time, wrote letters to the most respected record producers in the business. There was George Martin, Shel Talmy, Pete Townsend, and Jimmy Miller, asking them to all produce his band. In the letter to Miller, Doug mentioned that he and his bandmates knew Steve Winwood and encouraged Miller to ask Winwood about Sky. Doug didn't hear back from anyone until Jimmy Miller called him at his parents' home in Detroit. Sure enough, Miller checked with Winwood and he gave Sky a glowing thumbs up, telling Jimmy that the band was really good. High compliments, high praise coming from the great Steve Winwood. Miller agreed to stop in Detroit on his way from New York City to LA. The band picked Miller up at the airport and rushed over to Motown to use one of their rehearsal rooms to audition for Miller. Miller was very impressed with Sky, so he signed them to a 2-record deal with the RCA. Despite the expert navigation from a veteran collaboration like Jimmy Miller, though, Sky did not get off the ground. The band broke up, and Doug Feiger and his longtime girlfriend, Judy Halpert, decided to move to LA, since that was, where the action was. Feiger played a couple of gigs with some LA bands and was hired to join the stage band for the Carpenters, actually. In 1976, Doug Feiger joined a band called the Rats, who changed their name to the Sunset Bombers. Although Feiger was a great songwriter and a lively frontman, there was always something missing with the band that he was part of, until he began to work with guitarist Bert Navere and connected with two other stellar players in LA to form the Knack. That was in 1978. The Knack had a lineup of Burton at lead guitar, Doug Feiger at rhythm guitar and lead vocals, Prescott Niles on bass, and Bruce Gary on drums. By the time Gary was 24, he was a sideman for Bob Dylan, George Harrison, and Dr. John, and he toured with Albert Collins, Jack Bruce, and Mick Taylor just after Taylor left the Rolling Stones. Now, the Knack hit the LA clubs hard, and in just a few months became one of the hottest new bands on the Sunset Strip. I'll tell you how hot they became after we thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, the only glasses that I'll ever wear. I love that you can customize your Zenni shape, color, and style, but especially the fact that you can put anything on the sides. I've got Professor of Rock. You can put the name of your business, your name, your nickname, your favorite band, whatever. Check it out today at Zenni.com. Now, when the Knack played a club in West Hollywood, this is how hot they were. There were lines around the block to see them. The fervor attracted rock and roll celebrities. There was Tom Petty, Stephen Stills, Eddie Money, and Ray Manzarek from The Doors, who all jumped on stage at one time or another to jam with the Knack. On one Friday night at the Troubadour, Bruce Springsteen, the boss, even joined the Knack on stage, and word spread quickly throughout the A&R reps. By the following Monday, the Knack had 14 offers from record companies. I mean, after months of rejection letters and years of playing with fruitless bands, Doug Feiger was back on the path for rock stardom. But first, he would have to meet his muse. Feiger's girlfriend, Judy Halpert, who moved with Feiger from Detroit to chase his musical dreams in LA, she was friends with a 17-year-old named Sharona Alperin. Sharona was an avid concert goer, and Judy kept telling her friend, "You got to meet my boyfriend. You'd really like him. He's a musician." And then, one day, while Sharona was working at her place of employment, it was a clothing shop in the Beverly Grove area, Judy brought Feiger into the store. And when Feiger saw her, he was thunderstruck by her beauty. Not long after they met, Doug confessed to Sharona that he was hopelessly in love with her and called her his soulmate, predicting that someday they would be together. Sharona, too, had a steady. She wasn't about to give in to Doug Feiger's advances, but she became a fixture at every gig that the Knack played, even though Sharona and her friends were all underage at the time. Doug and the band were thrilled that Sharona and her friends were regulars at their shows and actually dubbed them the Knackettes. What's so funny about Sharona attending the Knack shows is that she would sometimes bring her boyfriend, which of course really bummed out the goo-goo-eyed Doug Feiger. While Sharona, 8 years younger than Doug, played hard to get, the Knack moved ahead like wildfire. They began working on material for their all-important debut album, Get the Knack. The first move, though, was getting a renowned producer, just like Doug Feiger wanted for his band Sky. One of the names that was not on their initial wish list was the great Mike Chapman. Fresh off his work with Blondie, their epic Parallel Lines album, and writing hit songs for Suzi Quatro and Sweet. Now, Chapman was mildly offended that he wasn't on the band's list, but that made him even more interested in working with them. He had been to several of their concerts, saw the lines around the block, and witnessed how tight the band was. Chapman contacted the band and told them that he wanted to work with them, and the guys were excited that he was on board. Now, Chapman's strategy to produce the Knack, that was to make sure that the band captured that exciting, raw energy of their live shows. So he told the band to simply perform the songs like they would at a crowded nightclub. Before the Knack was signed, Burton Avere came up with a very catchy drum figure that he played for Doug, and the two worked on a melody. They wanted to emulate the attitude of their idols, The Who and the Kinks, while incorporating the stripped-down punk and the new wave sensibilities of artists like Dave Edmunds, Nick Lowe, and Elvis Costello, who were getting big at the time. New wave was coming in.
You really got me now. You got me so I got me bad night. You really got me. We don't get fooled again. Wrap it up when you don't really need it.
Burton was lit up by Costello's second album, this year's Model, especially the tracks No Action and Pump It Up. Great song. Still over the moon about the obsession with Sharona Alperin, it didn't take long for Doug Feiger to write lyrics to Burton's riff he titled My Sharona. He wrote the song in 15 minutes, singing along to Burton's riff to perfect the cadence and nail the vocal phrasing. The song's stuttering vocal effect of the repeated my Sharona, that chorus burrows straight from Roger Daltrey's vocal style in the 1965 Who classic My Generation.
I'm just talking about my generation.
The arrangement for My Sharona was built entirely around Burton's riff. Prescott Niles created just a funky bass groove that rode along with Burton's guitar lead. And the final ingredient, though, proved invaluable, was that drum sequence from Gary Bruce. It was a very integral part of the tune's one-listen addiction. The lightning success of My Sharona and Get the Knack coincided with a bolt of fallout for the Knack. You know, whether the band liked it or not, the media pitched them as the second coming of the Beatles. And the Beatles' ripoff stigma began to affect the band's long-term credibility. The band loved the Beatles, of course, and Feiger called watching the Beatles on Ed Sullivan in 1964 the pivotal moment he knew that he wanted to pursue rock and roll.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you something.
But the Knack never intended to copy the Beatles. Pundits pointed to what they perceived as shameless Beatles posturing, starting with the front cover of Get the Knack resembling, the cover of Meet the Beatles, their landmark debut LP released in January of '64, right at the beginning. And those that did not know the history of the band were just unaware of how good their musicianship truly was. The Knack became a victim of their own success, manifested with a significant sales and airplay decline on the second single, Good Girls Don't. It did peak at number 11, but not even close to My Sharona.
I should be telling you, good girls don't, but I do.
And their lead single from the second album, Baby Talk Sturdy, that stalled at number 38 on the Billboard Hot 100.
When she said do it, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it, yeah.
So let's get back to the tale of Doug and the real-life Sharona. Before Sharona became Doug Sharona, she agreed to pose for the sleeve for the My Sharona 45 disc, wearing a revealing tank top and tight jeans. Very iconic cover. Then the two began dating, and they lived together for 3.5 years. The couple basically lived out of a suitcase because, Sharona traveled with Doug and the band during their worldwide tour. The lifestyle and Doug's intense infatuation, that overwhelmed Sharona, and she had to escape from the relationship. Sharona claimed that it wasn't the phenomenon of My Sharona that she had to escape from. It was Doug's possessiveness. She had to liberate herself to become her own Sharona, so to speak, not someone else's. Doug and Sharona split up and married other people, but they remained friends. Sharona actually visited Doug often in his final months before he sadly succumbed to a long battle with brain and lung cancer in 2010. Sharona Alperin has had a long, successful career as a realtor in LA, specializing in the buying and selling of celebrity properties. And yes, people still sing My Sharona to her. She is a permanent part of pop culture thanks to Doug Fieger and the Knack. Over the years, the undeniable power pop infection of My Sharona has inspired many rock luminaries in different genres, silencing unfair critics and bolstering the legacy of the Knack. During the making of Michael Jackson's 1982 Thriller album, producer Quincy Jones aspired to include a rock and roll song in the vein of My Sharona. The King of Pop subsequently wrote, "Beat It." Run DMC heavily sampled My Sharona on their influential hip-hop track, It's Tricky. And it's widely known that Get the Knack was one of Kurt Cobain's all-time favorite albums. So we pay our deep respects to Doug Feiger. May he rest in peace. My Sharona captivated a new generation of fans when it was placed in a really fun scene in the 1994 movie Reality Bites, of course starring Winona Ryder and Ethan Hawke. The music supervisor for Reality Bites was also working with Quentin Tarantino at that time on his film Pulp Fiction. Tarantino wanted to use My Sharona in Pulp Fiction for the disturbing scene in the back room of the pawn shop, where they bring out the gimp.
Well, bring out the gimp.
Feiger had his choice, and he opted for placement in Reality Bites. Now, because of the movie's popularity with the young music crowd, My Sharona recharted on the Billboard Hot 100 at number 91. Also in Australia at number 72. A great song can do that all the time. Hitting hard with culture multiple times. I remember it as a little boy, barely able to speak, but I could sing My Sharona. And I remember just laughing as my friend Mike in high school watched Reality Bites, and he's like, "This song is so cool, this new song, I have to know who sings it." I remember telling him, "Yeah, the song's like 15 years old." He didn't believe me. And then, of course, when Weird Al parodies your song, you're hot stuff. In fact, Doug Feiger helped Weird Al get his first record. So the Knack's debut album, Get the Knack, that sold more than 6 million copies. But the Knack's second album, But the Little Girls Understand, that was deemed a failure, even though it sold over 2 million units. The Knack was constantly under pressure to deliver another My Sharona, but it just wasn't to be. The pressure from the industry and internal strife within the band, that led to Doug Feiger leaving the Knack at the end of 1981, shortly after the release of their third studio album, Round Trip. Just a little over 2 years after their incredible rise to fame, instead of being the next big band, the Knack was deemed a flash in the pan. Now, the band reunited in 1986, and they went through several subsequent breakups and reunions through the death of Bruce Gary until Doug Feiger passed in 2010. The Knack may not have been the second coming of the Beatles, as many in the media tagged them, but they did give us bottle lightning that may only be captured once in a lifetime, if it's captured at all. My Sharona, it's a timeless, feel-good force of power pop that went viral before viral was even a term. The Knack's mega smash is a historic example of how the right song can change the mood of the world in less than 5 minutes. Leave us a comment about the Knack and this bottle lightning classic, My Sharona. What are your memories of the song? What do you remember the first time you heard it, or when you heard it in Reality Bites, the movie, the second time? Let us know in the comments below. If you dig our content, make sure that you subscribe below so that you never miss out on our videos. Check out our Patreon. The link is in the description. New merch is up here or at professorofrock.com. All this helps us to keep the music alive. That's always the goal. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.